Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Rafaela, and I'm the editorial coordinator at Architecture Hunter. It's great to have you all here with us today for another session of our webinar series, where we bring together architects from different contexts to share their work, perspectives, and experiences. Before we start, I'd like also to quickly mention that this week we officially opened submissions for the Architecture Hunter Awards, now in its third edition. And we're currently in the early entry phase, so if you have a project you're proud of, this is a great moment to submit it. And now moving to today's theme. As many of you may already know, at Architecture Hunter, we usually dedicate each month to a specific theme that guides our conversations. And this month is a special one for us, not only because of International Women's Day, celebrated on March 8th, but also because Architecture Hunter itself was founded by a woman, Amanda Fedber, our founder and editor-in-chief, who is also leading today's Q&A sessions. At the beginning of each month in our newsletter, Amanda shares a personal reflection on the theme that we're exploring. In this theme, she brought up a question that really stayed with us. Why do we still say female architect when we almost never say male architect? It may sound like a small detail, but it reveals something deeper about how the profession has been shaped over time. And it also reflects a balance we're constantly trying to navigate, creating space to highlight women in architecture while recognizing that their work goes far beyond that label. So today's conversation is really about that, about perspectives and the different ways women are shaping the spaces we live in. And before we begin, just a quick reminder, please feel free to send your questions through the Q&A tab throughout the presentations. After each talk, we'll have a live Q&A moderated by Amanda. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Linda Thiel. Sorry if I mispronounce your last name. Linda is a partner at White Architecture and the founder of their London studio. Her work focuses on housing, urban development, and mixed-use projects with a strong emphasis on quality of life and public space. Bringing a Scandinavian perspective, she explores how architecture can respond to urbanization while creating long-term sustainable environment for communities. So please join me in welcoming Linda.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation later on as well. Do you want me to start sharing my presentation straight away? Or
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
So I'm, as you already said, so I'm Linda Thiel. I'm with White Architecture. I've been working as an architect for not quite 30 years, but almost 25 plus years. And I will be talking a little bit about the Scandinavian approach to shaping cities through sustainable strategies, and how we can rethink urban neighborhoods and community-focused design. And this will be through sort of my sort of lens as a woman and a mother. And yeah, I mean, I'm a Swedish background, so. And I will come to some specific projects as well. But I will start with just introducing White Architecture. Our company was founded 75 years ago, and it's been sort of spearheaded by community involvement and collaboration. Sydney White, who founded the company back in 1951, has had the aim to improve society through architecture. And his legacy really lives through our ambition and taking that forward. We are an employee-owned company with about almost 450, 600 employees. But the employee ownership really enables us to focus on collaboration, how we see that our profit should be spent. We do a lot of practice-based research through development and through our projects. And over the past 10 years, more than 300 employees have actually been involved across the whole spectrum, from curious beginners into research to fully fledged researchers. And I think that really brings something to our practice as a whole and also boosts our projects. So we're mainly a European company. Our main presence is in Sweden, and in Norway, Germany, and the UK. But we also do have a presence in East Africa and Canada. And I wanted to share this slide. These are the most recent numbers for our sustainability report in terms of the proportion of men and women in our company. So in terms of employees, we have 55% women, and in management, we have 44%. And then on our board level, we have 55% women. So it's really, so, focusing on 50-50, but also promoting and enabling women to take leading roles in the company. I've been with the company for almost 20 years, and this has progressed throughout all of that time. And over the last two periods of our CEOs have been women leading the company. Our vision is for all of our projects to be climate neutral and regenerative through design excellence. And this is really through to we all know our challenges in terms of climate, and currently we also have sort of global instability. I think the aspect of what we do as architects and urbanists, we have a real chance to impact what the climate output is. And we really do have a role to play, and we need to work within our planetary boundaries. And I'm showing this image of a sea bath that a colleague of mine designed many years ago outside of Copenhagen, and it's a photo from this winter. And it shows not only the closeness and access to nature that we sort of are born with in Scandinavia, but also the challenges and kind of the harshness of the climate that we're dealing with. And that is something that we have to acknowledge when we're designing. And I think it also impacts the way we live and how we actually share space. So design impact in relations to nature. 70% of Sweden's area is actually forest. We're kind of embraced with nature most of the time. And I think that also plays a role in how our cities have developed and how they're designed. We also have it's called freedom to roam in English, which means that the general public have the freedom to roam freely across nature and even past private land, as long as you keep away from the main buildings. And obviously you can't do whatever you want when you walk through the forest. But it's kind of building on respect for both the forest and for our like the whole society and the people that we meet and that we work with. So the last 10, 15 years, we've been working a lot with timber design across the company. This is due to sort of circularity, biodiversity, but we also need to consider forestry. And this is some images from last year's Biennale, when we had an exhibition in terms of the fact that we do have a responsibility beyond the building site. I'm not sure whether my toolboxes here are covering anything, but I'm sure it's fine. The aspect of using timber is obviously good from a climate or carbon footprint point of view, but we also need to make sure that we manage our forestry accordingly so that we don't do any harm. One thing that I work with a lot and we do across the company is rethinking urban neighborhoods. Not necessarily rethinking from scratch, but constantly evolving with society and culture, considering the context in different regions that we're working in. And we see this as reshaping cities or places where we can create a healthier and more connected communities. And this does have an aspect on how we treat our shared spaces in terms of public realm, the thresholds between public and private, and also in terms of whether the buildings are the backdrop for the public life to take place, rather than designing them as the key personalities in a neighborhood, which some of them obviously can be and probably should be, but the main aspect of our societies and the way we live and sort of relate to other people is in the public scenario. In terms of community-focused design, this is an example from a competition that we just won in the Netherlands, where how nature can actually benefit the community, and with access to nature, if that is possible. Obviously, across Scandinavia and the Nordics, we're almost placing buildings in a kind of a humble way into nature, whereas I'm aware that in some regions might need to create nature to be close to where we live and where we spend our time. But this is also something that's becoming more and more important in terms of managing both urban heat islands or stormwater when the climate is getting more volatile, you can say. This is an image of Hammarby Sjöstad in Stockholm, very close to our Stockholm office. Someone's raised their hand. Do I take questions now, or do I just carry on and then we take questions after?
You can carry on and then we do the questions
Okay,
when you're in
sure.
the
Thanks.
presentation.
Yeah. And I think this image is really showing the aspect of the public space where a lot of things should be able to carry on in parallel or simultaneously. And it also shows the fact that public places or parks have to work really hard today. They need to meet a lot of different demands from different user groups and different things to be happening. It needs to manage climate, nature, accessibility, inclusive design. They need to be safe and they need to be legible and well connected. And I think that's why when designing neighborhoods, places, and cities, it is really critical that we get these shared spaces right. And I think when you do get that, and when people do have the ability to live their best lives, it really strengthens the communities and it strengthens the relationship between people. The aspect of, I mean, also considering today's theme, I think this is something that I've come across since I started working or even studying in the 90s, is cities for whom and designed by whom. So who do we actually create our cities or places for, and who actually designs them, and who is the author of legislation about making decisions, how the whole system is set up, and not only between different stakeholders, but also from a gender perspective. I think that spaces genuinely become different when they're designed by women, or whether they're designed, or, I mean, could also be designed by communities that really know their area very, very well, or a mixed group. We all know that projects we work on are never a single-handed solution. It's always a teamwork. But I do think projects or teams that are led by women might take a slightly different approach to how we design places. And I think this statement, this quote is really good. A city for all is a city that leaves no one behind. And I'm a really strong advocate for designing for some of the weaker communities or people in our societies. I also come from a background with no one in my family was an architect, but both my parents worked with different international aid organizations, from a organizational point of view and from sort of aid in countries that had sort of nature catastrophes. And I think realizing the vulnerability that we all have, and I might argue women and girls in particular, it's really important to understand how to create spaces and how our designs actually impact that work. We as not sure how well you know Sweden, but we are generally, our background is a very gender equal society. We have a very strong female leadership within politics across different levels. We have amazing childcare, which doesn't cost a fortune. So this enables women and young women to actually study, work, start a family, and continue to work throughout that time. So when there was a study that came out in 2015 from Stockholm University showing that our public spaces aren't used on the same um, demands by girls and boys when they reached a certain age. Basically, after 7 years old, boys predominantly use public spaces and sports ground, whereas it's only 80% boys and 20% girls. So we started a research project trying to explore why this is, which led to a lot of co-creation and workshops with young girls in different areas to discuss what they felt that they needed. Um, and that brings me to London, where we worked with these principles. So jumping sort of from still within Europe, but jumping around. I founded our London office in 2015. At the time, we mainly focused on housing and urban design projects, although our white as a practice work across all market sectors. And we were very fortunate to be able to work on some social affordable housing projects early on. And I think it was partly due to bringing our Scandinavian approach to designing neighborhoods. There's this one project that I'm going to highlight, which is in Barking in London. So the red circle on this map is what you would probably call central London, where you have Westminster and you have St. Paul's Cathedral. And then the yellow circle is Barking in sort of East London, quite far away from the city central. And this is a neighborhood with many challenges. But zooming in on that yellow circle is the Gascoigne estate. The red dot on the top here is the train station. And then we have worked on 3 sites across the estate. And the small red dots are schools across the estate. And that's really important in this project because it's a regeneration of a 60s estate. But the 3 schools are really good and there are lots of pupils going to those schools. So one of the challenges was also to be able to retain families on the estate whilst doing this regeneration projects. So when I first came to Barking, this is in 2018, this was the state of the place. It's an original 1960s estate, which had these 12-story towers and 3-story linear apartment blocks. It was very open and very sort of difficult to navigate between the buildings. There weren't many straight sight lines. As you can see from this image, it was a lot of open space, but it wasn't very green. And the parts that were green were basic lawns, and they were always fenced off and not so much used. And even if everything felt very exposed and you would have potential eyes on the street, it didn't feel very safe because it was difficult to navigate. There were some long distances between various smaller shops that you could have sort of feel as safe havens. So our approach to this was to fundamentally rethink the whole landscape approach and public realm approach. Another thing worth highlighting is that in Barking and specifically on Gascoigne Estate, with sort of measured across London, has some of the lowest life expectancies, health problems across the community, has some of the lowest incomes, very high unemployment, and they have a very long waiting list for people that are on the social housing waiting list. So these were some of the critical aspects that we had to also consider when doing these new designs. And another thing was, although there is a really strong community and markets and people feel that they're quite well connected within their communities, obviously it was kind of a harsh environment. And we were, in the beginning of the project, we were also aware of that the crime rate was very high on the estate, some gang-related crime, and there was also a high ratio of violence against women. So we felt the urgency to bring our co-creation process and these workshops to London. And with the benefit of having 3 schools on this stage, we could do several workshops with girls in year 8. So they're approximately 13 years old, um, and really have deep interviews with them in terms of how they use their neighborhood and what they feel, where they feel safe or where they feel unsafe, or where they think that things could be improved, or what they would want from their neighborhood. And I think it was amazing to see how immensely proud they were of their place. They kept saying, why should we go to Spain on holiday when we can actually stay here if it only were a bit nicer and greener and had safer public spaces? It should be said that there are 2 large parks close to the estate or just on the fringe of the estate, but they didn't feel safe. But I think as an architect, by bringing in social anthropologists and behavioral scientists into our work, we can really understand and kind of unpick how the community works with these or what they need and how we could work with the place to create something that is truly embraced as safe and equal and usable and more inclusive. Some of the things that came out of the workshops might sound both simple and profound, but it's really about clear sight lines and having alternative exits, um, perimeter pathways rather than fenced enclosures. So these sort of fenced off green spaces felt very unsafe in a way because you can get closed in. They also wanted much more lighting that eliminates dark corners, places to sit without feeling too exposed, and small stages for informal gatherings and play. So, and we worked across 3 phases, and I'm going to run through them briefly in order of the way that we worked on them. So the first one we worked on was the largest phase, which is called East Phase 2. It's 435 units and a big 5,000 square meter park. But this was what it looked before. And this here you can see that element of the fenced off small playgrounds and green spaces. And I think by taking this approach and having these workshops with these girls and or perhaps me leading our multidisciplinary team, we did take a different approach to some of the other phases that were ongoing at the same time, led by other architects and had sort of male leaders in their teams. But this is really to build on a holistic approach to regenerate and revitalize Barking as a major town center. And the brief was to create a rich mix of open spaces, nature, arts, and culture to create a really, truly livable neighborhood. And we felt that based on all this, the communication we'd have with the community and the girls and being on site a lot, we really needed to sort out a really clarity in the public realm, spatially and socially, and build confidence in terms of how these spaces could be used. So it's been, I mean, you can talk about whether it's public luxury or just basic standard. But in this case, with providing so much affordable and social housing, it was sort of labeled as public luxury, but providing a range of spaces for people to meet and creating this basic infrastructure for a community. And this also then adds value to the wider area around the estate. And the aim was also to sort of rename it, sort of move away from the name estate and call it more of a neighborhood. There are some private apartments here too, and the courtyards are tenure blind design, so we share private and affordable social homes on the same courtyard, which can be a challenge, but I think that's something that allows you to see different people within your community and see role models or create a better understanding on what people you're actually sharing these spaces with. The site plan on the left also shows the two major courtyard blocks and the way that we sort of cut them open so that you can be able to see through. That was something that was really well perceived in terms of not just being in a fully enclosed space. And you can see on the image on the right that you can see that gap in between the buildings where you can then access the street. It also divides the courtyard into two or three smaller spaces, which was quite successful in terms of the use of the space when it's kind of high demand on using them. Here's another image of the same courtyard, and we're working with a variety of large balconies or deck access solutions for these homes, and predominantly having larger homes on the ground floor. And you can also see how some of these outdoor gardens on the ground floor units sort of connect straight out to the courtyard. One thing was that we were trying to enforce a wider palette of colors. That was also something that the community really was striving for and said would be a positive addition to the whole site. We also added a lot more trees and greenery. There were a few really nice mature trees on the site, which we could save many of them, but not all. But the sort of the nature contribution to this project is that is planted almost 200 trees. I'm not sure whether you can see the text on the bottom here, but some of the aspects here is the a lot of cycles, parking spaces, the big park that you've seen images from, and quite a lot of new homes. And this building that you see in this image is providing some of the lowest affordable rent homes. But we were very cautious to make sure that they were all making no sort of difference between private and affordable homes. Trying to, and 85% of these homes in this phase went to local people, with some passive house homes as well. And we were able to reduce our CO2 emissions quite substantially. One part of working in London, which is different from Sweden, not sure how it is in other parts of the world, but the teams across the wider disciplines had 1,400 hours of supporting employment for locals and 190 volunteering days. The other phase is a different sort of plot size and shape. So it's a very linear plot with many really big mature trees, as you can see on the left-hand side of this slide. And the aim was to keep them and sort of tailor the buildings around them. So we were going from a really fragmented ground to creating a coherent neighborhood. See the existing images on the right there. So that was why these blocks were shaped with sort of kinks to embrace these existing trees and creating some playground on the back. And this was also something in terms of creating, this is a ground floor site plan. So we had quite a lot of homes on the ground floor because this site sits sort of to the further south of the estate, quite far away from the station. So if you're walking home from the station, it takes you like 15 minutes. And it was quite critical to create some true eyes on the street when you come down to this area so that you felt that you had some safety aspect in terms of that overlooking aspect. And we also created smaller pockets of play and green so that you could get really close to that in front, in terms of your home. The last phase that we worked on was really embracing everything that we have been through, the other two. And we had achieved a real understanding on where the lowest affordable rent homes would need to go and how to shape taller elements. And also working really hard with the threshold between your private front door to the fully public realm or playgrounds and that sort of shift in between in terms of some green buffer zones, some steps, to create some clarity in the public realm in terms of that sort of public-private shift. This place was also in a very poor state, and we created these connecting routes, pedestrian routes with green buffers for rainwater collection, seating, and the courtyards were really shaping the kind of embracing the fact that you would have a private outdoor place, but also a playground for smaller children. As you can see on this site plan, with some of the larger trees are the ones that have been retained from before, and how the sort of the towers are then framing the courtyards, dividing them into sort of two almost separate areas with a middle ground, and the playground that sort of sits in front of the whole development. And I think this was also the fact that we wanted to create something that felt green, sustainable. It had to be produced really fast because there was this really need and urge to get more homes to be provided for people on the waiting list. But also create the kind of the visibility and the being able to see through these courtyards, even if they, in this case, were fenced off. And it also includes a community hub that can be used by the community and the local authority for different things. And this is showing some of those elements, managing the threshold between the private and the public in terms of these buffer zones. And along sort of a view from from one of the major parks. And this was also very much sort of a conversation between us, the planners, and the local community. The local community wanted more color, and they wanted the taller elements or the towers to be similar but also different, so they could be easily recognized. I just wanted to, I think I've been speaking for quite some time, just wanted to finish off on some thoughts about shaping organizational spaces through leadership, and how I think both as a Swede or a Scandinavian, I do that slightly from a different perspective, but also in terms of being a woman in the industry and shape not only the built environment, but also shaping the professional ecosystem around it. I think having had the fortune and being privileged enough to be able to work through whilst raising two children and doing lots of things and working on an international market, it's really important to show that it is possible as a woman to do that. I always try to mentor, I mean, everyone in the office, but try to focus on younger women that are actually wondering, well, how am I going to, develop in my profession? Do I need to take a lot of time off to raise my children? I always say that family comes first, but I think you also need to sort of nurture your professional development. Another thing that I think is interesting is translating Scandinavian values that we would argue are sort of focusing on openness, trust, and empowerment. And we work in very flat organizations, and how to do that in a multinational context. Obviously, you can never just copy paste something, whether it's design or organizational changes from one context to another. So I think it's always has to do with being humble and understanding who you're dealing with and what you can bring to that conversation. But it is really interesting, just to finish off, that it has been said many times, and also going back to the topic today, is that research show that organizations that are led by women can achieve a higher profit. They show sort of improved employee engagement and better ESG performance and other things. And it was interesting to see a quite recent Forbes article and research, I think from last year, just highlighting those sort of 5 topics in terms of higher performance and profitability, enhanced collaboration and culture, improved decision making, higher emotional intelligence and empathy, and greater innovation and risk management. And I think, not the least, sort of effective mentorship. I'm not saying that this cannot be done or will happen in an organization led by men, but I do think that we lead things differently. Also, having worked since the mid 90s, when I was always the only woman in the room, whether it was in team meetings or on construction sites, to nowadays when it feels like it's 50-50. And sometimes I work on projects when it's almost only women. And I think there is a slight difference in terms of how those projects are run, depending on the collection of people. So I guess my what I want to just sort of end on is I think making sure that working in very diverse teams is a great benefit. You need to have many voices coming to the table, not the least in terms of what we do in our profession and shaping places for many people. You have to have an understanding of who they are and what they need to be able to do that. But I think that was yeah. I think I'll end on that to give time for some questions. Hope I didn't speak for too long.
Hi, Linda. Thank you so much for this amazing presentation, especially knowing more about the workshop that you did with the girls. That was amazing. And the result, the outcome was incredible. And because you finished your speech, what you about saying about what like sorry, because you finished your speech with what you're saying, where you're talking about like how nowadays it's 50-50. Um, also, as more women lead practices and conversations, what shifts are you noticing in the way that architecture engages with society, sustainability, or users? I think the workshops are a great example, but in general, how do you see this difference, the shifts?
I think it's shifting, or what I've seen just over the last 25 years is projects have shifted. And I think when you have women leading them, you are dealing with someone who has, we are more vulnerable in our cities or generally. So I think we're sort of coming to these designing places from a space where we feel like, and I still, last night here in London, I was like, I'm going to take that street or this street. Where do I think it's going to be, where is it going to be more people? I want to walk, where I'm not alone. And I think coming to that and having that almost sort of unconscious with you, and you're bringing that to design, or I think or at least I think about how things are shaped and how would I feel walking around, or how would my daughter feel. But I'm also nowadays thinking about how would my son feel, because obviously they're also quite exposed to safety issues. But I think one thing that's been seen in across many different countries is that women tend to be sort of taking more responsibility in terms of childcare. So and we tend to walk and cycle more. Not sure about United States, America solutions, but in Europe at least. So I think having that when you're walking with kids and, grocery bags, you just understand what would make your life easier. And I think you're always trying to knowing that we have to juggle a lot of things. It's like, how can we make things being really easy to use and efficient for people to um, to spend their time in?
Mhm. And do you think that women tend to approach architecture differently, or is the real difference about the systems that we had to navigate?
I think I think we still, especially me, I mean, I always had to argue harder and more for the designs that I wanted to get through. Because it was like, well, that's nice. Or maybe are you just the interior architect? Not at all saying that that's less important than being an architect, but it was
Mhm.
always seen as being like the woman caring for a household and interested in interior design. Whereas I come from it from like a more mathematical or construction materials perspective. And I think having had to argue your place at the table can be really exhausting, but it can also be feel really fulfilling when you have a successful project. And I think that yeah, I think there is a slight shift when it's more mixed, but I think it's still there. And I think, I mean, we know that, many leaders are men. I'm not saying that they're necessarily not doing a good job, but I think we just do it differently. And I think that we do listen more, and I think that we do embrace and make sure that everyone is along kind of in the team.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
from my perspective. And I know this, and these things can't be not personal because it's always a personal experience. So I'm sure there are many, many examples that might be
Yeah.
different.
No, but I completely agree. Like, of course, there are some, it's not like 100% of the cases, but most of them
Yeah.
is how it works. So I agree.
Yeah.
And in your perspective, looking ahead, what needs to change structurally or culturally for the next generation of women architects to not just enter the field, but truly lead it?
I think one thing is there's still a pay gap between male and female architects. And I think it's really important to push that so there is no pay gap. And there's also been seen a sort of tendency in some countries where the shift has already happened when you have more women architects than men, that salaries actually go down. And I think that's really something that we need to be monitoring and make sure that doesn't happen because money does make a difference. And I think if it is a high paid, it's a good paid job, then that attracts more people in the best. I also think that I'm super privileged. I could work throughout my children's daycare. They went to kindergarten from when they were a year and a half old and had a great time and didn't cost me anything. So I could just carry on with my own company. I think the support system for women is really, really important. I can see that with sort of my younger female colleagues in the London office. They're really juggling, the cost of having a family in London and time and because not everyone can live close to their parents that can help with childcare. So I think even better support system for women so that they can actually do both, because it is important in our profession to know what it's like, not only working, but having a life, whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah, I agree. I think supporting is one of the most essential things we need to pay attention to because we see in universities that, I don't know, like sometimes in architecture universities, especially here in Brazil, most of the students are women. But when we
Mm,
see the offices, most of the offices are led by men.
yeah,
So it's not that we don't have women in the field, but actually it's the opposite, quite the opposite. But because women have to manage so many other things rather than just focusing on their career,
yeah,
supporting is, I think, one of the most essential things we have to pay
yeah.
attention. Well, Linda, we don't have much time for many
No,
questions because we still have another presentation. But thank you so much for this amazing presentation. It was really inspiring and it was great to hear from you. Thank you so
thank you
much.
so much for the invitation. Thanks.
Thank you, Amanda, for guiding the conversation, and Linda for such an insightful presentation and discussion. And now, moving on to our next speaker, I'm very happy to introduce Maria Loreto Flores. Maria Loreto is an associate director at Zaha Hadid Architects, where she has been working since 2006, leading major international projects across different regions of the world. Alongside her professional practice, she's also actively involved in initiatives that promote gender equity in architecture and is part of the strategic board of Women in Architecture UK, where she leads international outreach. And when we learned more about her work with women in architecture, we knew she would be such a meaningful voice to have in this conversation that it would be incredibly valuable to hear her perspective on this topic. So please join me in welcoming Maria Loreto.
Hello.
Hi, nice to see you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the invitation.
Of course.
So I'm ready to share my screen. Hope everything works fine. Yep. So is my screen visible?
Yes, we can see it. Perfect.
Okay. So I would like to start this introducing myself and where my journey in architecture started. So I'm an architect originally from Chile. So you can see that this is where I was shaped as an architect, surrounded by the amazing geography of my country, and also inspired by many of the handcraft and art that it was present there. I then came to London to study in the Architectural Association. I wanted to experiment in design. It was my aim to go a little bit beyond of what I learned in Chile. So I joined the design research lab in the Architectural Association, where I had the opportunity to work in groups and to have Patrick Schumacher and also Zaha Hadid as part of our teachers. That, of course, led me to work in the company that I joined in 2006. 19, 20 years already, where I have the privilege to see the evolution of the early projects, the early years, and the geometry that it was identifying Saha at that time in the 2000s until now that we became a global company of more than 500 people, 50 nationalities, and 45 languages. So it is really a very diverse place where to work. We work across the globe in all typologies and in different scales. We are based in London, where we have our headquarters, but we have satellite offices in Beijing, Shenzhen, and Hong Kong, where most of our projects are based, and also small office in Berlin. So the most amazing thing for me as a young architect joining this place, it was the idea of working with a multidisciplinary team where I could somehow understanding how all these projects that I saw when I was a student in the magazines were really built. Currently, we have more than 95 projects built in our portfolio and also 36 that are under construction in different parts of the world. Some of them are the ones that are shown in this image, spanning from master plans to museums, to stadiums, to residential projects and other infrastructure. Yeah, this one, I think it came before. So the main thing for me during these 20 years and the way that it shaped, who I am as an architect and also the way that we do architecture is this evolution that we experiment in terms of geometries and also in terms of new tools. At the very beginning, the work of Zaha Hadid was mainly related to art. It came from the expression of the Russian constructivism into these graphic spaces that are the images that you see on the top, working with analog models, with relief models, resin models, to the current projects we have that are done in a parametric way and that they are designed with softer geometries. So there is a matter of time, there is development of tools, but there is also the work of a company that is always trying to go beyond the traditional and push the boundaries of architecture. So this is one of the first projects I work on. So it's a very different environment of what you could see now. This is Pierre Vives in Montpellier in France. So you see this as a studio where things are happening, a project that was mainly done through models, as you see in the upper part, sketches, but also through sections and plans, which was a way to understand diagrams mainly. But then that was extrapolated to the three-dimensionality of the spaces and how we imagine these very monolithic pieces at that time to create and to shape these spaces. And this is how the building looks like now, already more than 10 years. Understanding that, I moved to a different part of the world. This was in Singapore, to a different program. And the first commercial project we did back in 2007, that it was the Lidong in Singapore, a residential complex of 7 towers and 12 villas, where we first experienced what it was to design in a generative way. So we wanted to create this series of towers that were not the let's say the shapes that you extrude traditionally as towers, but we wanted them to blend more with the vegetation that is part of the main characteristics of the site. And be this type of flowers. But for that, we create a problem in terms of the areas, because of course, being a commercial project, the client wanted to have a specific areas, a specific number of flats, which we have to negotiate. So this is where we started thinking that some of the digital tools that we were working with will help us to shape and create the movement in these towers that we wanted to achieve. After that, as we say, the evolution of the tool helped us to shape other type of spaces that we didn't think they were possible, when we were doing the first project. This is the Morpheus Hotel in Macau. That is the first hotel with an metallic exoskeleton, in this case, that allows the internal space not to have columns. So then this exoskeleton is connected through the slabs just to the cores, and creating also a very symbolic building for the area of Macau. This was a project that the client envisioned as a love letter for the city, and also creating a space that was completely unexpected. The generation of this project was a collaboration, digital collaboration in terms of architects, engineers, and also the manufacturers. There is a definition of surfaces, of structural members that needed to be all rendered together to be able to produce this amazing structure, but also the cladding and as well the glass facade. The structure is as beautiful as the final result. The pieces are huge in terms of size. You can see the size of a person there working, and it creates a big challenge to produce something that looks very strong in terms of a structure, but becomes a jewel in the interior of the building, where you can see through all these spaces that, as I was saying at the beginning, were completely unexpected and create a different journey at the interior of this building. All these projects have a rationale behind. I always like to say that, of course, what we see in the magazines and in the social media are beautiful projects, but they are not random design. They are all supported by a rational logic, by mathematics, by the work with the engineers, and also the work with the manufacturers. We do have in-house different teams that also help us to address items like, for example, rationalization of geometries for the idea of building facades and fabricating different pieces, but also teams that work with us in terms of energy and environment and sustainability. So all this research is applied always in pieces or in products, in pavilions that are done in collaboration with educational institutions, but also with manufacturers, and then they become part of the building. We think that feedback or that exchange of knowledge is also very important to keep us updated and also in the forefront of what we are doing. In terms of sustainability, we also have, as I was mentioning, an in-house team that help us now from the very beginning of a project or a competition to understand the location where we are and how the geometry that we are proposing needs to be adapted in terms of solar exposure, predominant winds, the energy that we can try to get from the building, from the site, and also the type of materiality that is available in the context. In terms of the latest projects that we are doing, and I think one of the most interesting topics is the generations of cities. No, there are a lot of countries generating, revitalizing, but also creating new areas of the city. And most of them are what we call smart cities or smart districts, that are pieces of or areas of the cities that they need to work in an integration with different programs, but also with the environment. Some of these examples are really interesting in terms of how they are generated. So this is also a fertile ground for us to experiment and to understand how our design can be implemented in different scales, but also how we can generate different digital tools that help us to do so. And we have, for example, this master plan in China, in the city of Chengdu. This is called a unicorn island, and is the conglomeration of different startups, different unicorn enterprises, that they are located in an area that it has a very important presence of biodiversity. Therefore, the landscape around all these cells is also very important. This is currently in construction, and you can see in some of these images. And then there is also this idea of generating public spaces and urban connections between all these buildings. The next one is the Xi'an Tencent Innovation City. This one is a master plan that is in a very strong connection with the nature, with this river that is next to it, creating all these kind of pedestrian viewing points that are connecting back to the volumes in this case. So even though it's a very technological approach to this new district that is working with the idea of being able to navigate through digital tools and to get some type of smart mobility, is also, very strong in the idea of connecting with the nature. Same thing in the Shenzhen Hong Kong Technopark that is revitalizing part of the waterfront of Shenzhen with this very massive public space. As we said, for us, what is important is that in these new areas of the cities, we need to have a mix of use, a mix of users as well. So then the city grows organically and is resilient and is also able to change with time in case that, for example, some plots that can be designed for industrial use, light industry or something like that could be used later on for another type of, for example, educational institutions, universities, and so on. This is another example in Malaysia. This is an innovation city as well, with a lot of integration of the vegetation again, because of the conditions of the site. And this is another example where it's very important the creation of this urban park. This one is a master plan in the city of Hangzhou, in the intersection of the Grand Canal coming from Beijing with the Qiantang River. In this case, there is this island still occupied by the fishermen of the area, with these two embankments that need to be designed as a park that are given back to the city, though the developments of the master plan, is done by a private developer. So the idea again in this case is to be inspired by the rich tradition of embroidery, silk embroidery of the city, creating all these paths, these pedestrian paths that are connecting back to the city through this pedestrian bridge. That is this kind of ribbon crossing from one side to the other. In terms of sustainability, our projects are also addressing many issues according to the context where we are. And I think that instead of being a problem, they are becoming really design features. This is the case of the CAPSARC petroleum studies in Riyadh. This is a research center designed as a series of cells in the middle of the desert. But then these cells are all oriented and shaped in a way that they are getting the best of the predominant wind, scooping the winds in to generate the ventilation and creating also these internal courtyards that allowed shadows and the people to be in these intermediate spaces. The use of material in an innovative way is also one of our concerns. So this is the auditorium of the Heydar Aliyev Center in Baku, done completely in timber. In this case, we are, let's say, getting away of our traditional materials and working with something that until now we were not using much in our projects. And that's why we decided also to propose this stadium, which is in the city of Stroud in UK, completely in timber in the middle of this master plan that has a very ecological approach. and also propose it in other type of venues in other part of the world, like this one, which is a cultural and theater center in Tahiti. This was a competition that we won some time ago, and is completely integrated with the way that the construction techniques are in the area. This is also a really good example of how the research gets applied. In this case, we are going a step forward, thinking on how to print with concrete in this case. So this is a bridge that we created for the Venice Biennale in 2021. The idea of this was to use materials in a way that they could also be assembled and disassembled, but as well reuse or recycle later on. So in this case, we have the concrete, we have the timber, and then the metallic structure, all of them separate so then they can be reused. And then these pieces in concrete were printed from liquid concrete. Another typology is what we call the vertical hubs. So going vertical, there are a series of towers, and all of them are showing, of course, a mix of programs, generally having podiums that are given to the city as part of the urban space, but also creating unexpected and memorable experiences inside, like this one, which is the Lisa Tower. Lisa Tower has the tallest atrium in the world. Is a 200-meter atrium, and this is not something that we did because we wanted. It came from a problem. In this case, the site that the client got was crossed by a metro line, and therefore we couldn't put the foundations of the building in the center, and we have to split it, and that create these two towers separated by this void. So instead of being a problem, the situation of the site became actually the main feature of the building. A similar case of these three towers connected by this kind of a spiraling space in the center that is in Wuhan, getting inside the tower, all what is the urban functions, commercial, mixing with some education, going up into residential and one office tower. And another example also in Shenzhen, the Tower C, which is these twin towers that are joined in the podium area, and then they are bringing up all the landscape to these bridges that are again connecting and making the towers not just isolated elements, but also part of the negotiation with the ground floor. And some of our last projects, Henderson, that is going to be opening next week, in Hong Kong, which is located in the central area of Hong Kong, in front of the Bank of China, full glass. What I wanted to show here is that for us, it's very important that what we promised to the client at the very beginning is almost the same that they get at the end. So we work really hard to maintain the integrity of the design throughout the whole process. We are also opening new markets and working in a different scale and in different contexts in Scandinavia. These are some of the projects that we have been developing. For example, this one that is in Norway is the exit of the metro station Fornebu. Some interiors for a tower created in Riga that is also using timber, and the stadiums in Aarhus in Denmark that is a smaller stadium that is contained within a forest and a green area, and then the Vilnius airport in Lithuania. So in this case, these projects, as we can see, they have a different scale and a different language than the ones that we can see in China or in Middle East, but they are trying to answer to their context and trying to develop as well a different language for that. This is, of course, for me, very important to show as well, because it's my region of the world, and I think it's also interesting to think on what's the language that we can get, in new territories and in new areas like this one that is in Latin America. These are some of the projects that we have in our old portfolio. Some of them are more than 10 years old, but I would like to show the latest one, which is La Avenue Tower in Buenos Aires. This one is a tower that is dominating the skyline now of the capital of Argentina. Is tower that was developed in terms of design by us, but in a very strong connection with the local partners, local architects and local engineers. And also it shows how it's possible to develop different materials locally. In this case, when we proposed, for example, the facade for this project, we wanted to use jersey, which was not available in the region. And we looked for it and we tried to partner with some companies until we found a company in Cordoba in Argentina that it was producing ceramics and it was able to replicate the material and create it for the whole tower. That for us is a virtuous cycle because we learn from the local context, but we also feel that we exchange knowledge, not only with the team that is working with us in the project, but also with the manufacturers that now are able to work with any other international architect producing this type of projects. These are some of the views. This project is also about to finish, maybe in a couple of months. Views from the lobby and also from the rooftop that it has this 360 views of the city. So this is my journey shaping spaces as an architect that developed almost 20 years of experience, as I'm showing from the early projects in Zaha until the projects that we do now, expanding and working as a privilege in different parts of the world, being able to know about different cultures and also the way that people works. And in parallel, I am part of the strategic board of Women in Architecture UK. This is a group that started in 1999 as part of the Riva Architects Group for Change, mainly addressing the problems that minorities and that women had at that time. I have to say in a very honest way that the problems are still the same. I think as the previous panelist was mentioning, things haven't changed much, but I think that now that we know which the problems are, we have to take more action. So Women in Architecture UK is a bigger group of almost 50 women. We are working in different parts of the architecture field, in companies, also in academia, also in NGOs. So we do have a wider range of knowledge of how things are happening now. We created a network, but more than a network, we are also a movement, and we have very clear objectives of what we wanted to do. So we want to expand the access to the profession for girls and young women. We have faced situations where we see many girls that wanted to get into architecture, very young, feel that is not a place for them. And rightly, because of course there are not many role models. And I think that this is something very important that I didn't mention at the beginning, but being a student back in Chile, Zaha Hadid was one of my main role models. You know, seeing her work in the magazines at that time, it was somehow what led me think that if one woman can do it, you know, I'm also able to. So I think it is quite important to have more women in the senior levels in the profession, because it's what helps you to feel that, you know, by that example you can also follow. We also would like to increase the representation of women in all the career stages. As we said, there is always a 50-50 in schools. In terms of junior architects entering into a company, there is also 50-50, but whenever we get to the higher positions, the number of women drop to 20% or even less. So the representation is not as we would like to have. There is also an important point on supporting women back after career breaks, and that's related mainly with maternity. Many women, after having kids, feel the pressure of the caring responsibilities that are not well balanced with men. And in that sense, there is a fear sometimes of what happened when I have to be back, if I'm up to date with softwares, with trends, with things that are happening. So I think there is a work of support there to be done. There is also an important point on being flexible. I think after the pandemic, we realized that working from home is one of the policies that helps companies to retain women, because when kids get sick or when you really need to stay home for something, you are able to work, but then you're able to be next to them. And also to change these structural changes. We talk a lot about a cultural change, which is the balance. This is not about saying that women are better than men in many things. We are different, and we have to balance out in between the two. How do we work, and which are our strengths? So we are committed to this. We wanted to take action, and we do it through a series of events throughout the year. We work here in London mainly, but we are extending to the whole UK. We do have a very successful mentoring program, which is free, and that it was launched now in January in Scotland. So this is part of the projects that we are doing, besides the create awareness in all the events that we do throughout the year. So this, as I say, is a long story that has been carried out through the years for women that, want to create this change. Back in 2020, we were all in lockdown, so we did these catch-ups in an online way, trying to support each other, trying to understand the difficulties, for example, of having to do homeschooling and then work at the same time from home. We also celebrate very widely the International Women's Day. We have a huge crowd every year in our events. Our mentoring program, as I was saying, is something that we are very proud of. We have around 600 mentees this year that we pair with mentors that are mainly senior members of different companies, male and females. And every year we celebrate with a winter social. Throughout the year, the mentoring program has several workshops, meetings, online with key speakers from different areas of the architecture that try to, give more knowledge and experience through these webinars to the mentees. We also partner with major events in London for panels. So we have been able to bring into the normal, let's say, events that were dedicated to, for example, London Build, in this case, that is dedicated mainly to construction and to materials in London, to have a separate stage that is for diversity and for the inclusion of women. We are also partnering with other similar associations in other parts of the world. This one was in Pakistan. You can see here Jasmine Larry, a very, very important figure as well for the architecture in Pakistan. And another important partner is UK RIF, which is one of the main real estate conferences in the UK. In that one, we also realized that it was very male dominated. So we create a fringe event that now became an official event every year, where we bring in women panelists trying to balance out the situation. And a very important point, very close to my heart, because I started with this from the pandemic, which is the parents group. In the parents group, we talk about what happens, with maternity, paternity leave, but also understanding how, parenthood evolve and how also your responsibilities need to be juggled at home and at work. So we have examples of people, parents from different companies coming and talking to us. And we are also partnering with the London Festival of Architecture every year to create workshops that are more thinking about the equitable London and diversity and inclusion in the city. One of our main assets last year, it was the launch of the Fawcett Society report together with Riva. we were invited to the House of Parliament. This report was done 23 years after the first one that Riva did regarding what happens with women in architecture. Unfortunately, we realized the problems are still the same, as I mentioned at the very beginning. But at this time, it is important that we take action. We have been creating awareness. We all know what happens, but now what we have to do is try to implement policies and good practices rather than in small or big companies across the country. And hopefully we can export all this knowledge, to other places in the world, to really understand which are the policies, which are the situations that a company needs to create in order to allow women to flourish, uh, to continue leading, and not to leave the career because it's losing important talent. So these are some of the result of that report. For example, 50% of women discovered that a male counterpart was earning more, which is very discouraging. A quarter a query about the discrepancy, and of course, there is never a straight answer to see why there are differences, though we know. And then how, 83%, for example, of women feel that their career progression has been impacted by kids. So I think that all these points are quite important, and we need to take them into account, and we need to create the situation that allow us to continue working. In my case, for example, I am a mom of twins, and I work let's say full time, having them, and it has been very important to have a partner that can take the other part of the load, that we can share it together, and we can both progress in the same way that we wanted in our career. So this is the work that we do in Women in Architecture. As I was saying, the mentoring program is one of our main achievements, and we are very happy to open it October this year again. It's for free, and we have felt the impact of this, helping mainly, young professionals in the career, partnering with the ones that have more experience and that can pass through that. As I was saying, the importance of having a role model. In my case, my role is to have this international outreach, to monitor similar associations, to share this information, and to represent WIA in different instances, forums, conferences as well, and hopefully to have collaborative projects with other parts of the world that help us to push more this agenda. Some of our events are here in this calendar. Some of them are online, so it will be really good if some of you are interested. Could also join us. Here are our contacts. So this is all for me. Thank you.
Hi, Maria. Thank you so much
Hello.
Hey. Thank you so much for this great presentation. Again, I mean, last Friday you were here in Brazil with us, just giving another speech. So I starting to get used to talk to you every Friday.
Happy
We'll
to
have
do
to
it.
figure out something for next week,
Yeah.
for next Friday. I really love that. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the presentation. It was great. And also learning about the Women in Architecture initiative, and also for sharing this data. This is so interesting. And well, I have a question for you.
Mhm.
Um, do you like, have you ever felt the pressure to adapt your voice or leadership style fit into a traditionally male-dominated environment? How did you navigate that?
Yes. I think it might have happened to every woman that you are asked to be stronger, or you are asked to talk louder, or you are asked to act more like a male without so many emotions, or not so nice sometimes. So I think this happens. We are different. We have different approach, and for quite a bit of time, I thought I should be like that. I should maybe become stronger and make my presence to show in a different way. But then I realized that at the end of the day, we need to be true to ourselves, and you have to find your leadership type, your own persona, and I try to be as much as possible, loyal to who I am. So I see my strengths. I am very strong in social interaction, in communication, and I try to find, parts of the projects that help me to show that, and I think that has been working well, because at the end of the day, you need, you need balance. Again, this is not about always being strong or always have, soft skills. You need to always find balance on everything. So learn a bit of the things that you don't have and being able to apply whenever they need to be applied, because there are moments that you need to, be strong or talk loud. But there are others that you need to be welcoming, warm, approachable, and try to create a safe space for people to express their ideas.
And I feel that it's hard sometimes, because at the same time, sometimes we are asked to be like strong. At the same time, if we're too strong, this is not good. Like this is like sometimes it's seen as a bad thing. So I don't know if you have ever watched the movie of Barbie,
Yeah,
Margot
yeah,
Robbie, but like the America Ferrera speech really gets me, because like you cannot be too strong, you cannot be too weak. Like it's
yeah,
hard to balance out all the stuff, So
yeah,
it's hard. Yeah.
yeah. I think. Well, in my case, because I do have 20 years of experience already, I kind of
Found this
go
balance.
go through that process, and found my place and my voice.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say that being part of women architecture also help a lot on that, because
Yeah.
whenever you are able to realize who you are in terms of recognizing yourself, your own strengths, is where you can see how you can apply them. And sometimes you need other people to tell you that, So I think in that sense, for example, it's very important that women celebrate other women's work. Is not just generosity, is a matter of creating community, and understand, how good you are doing, how well you do, even though you have to do millions of things at work. And it's fine that things are not going well one day, but you have to understand how much you are carrying on your shoulders, and being able to see it on other women as well. I think that is quite important to celebrate, to propagate the work of other women. We have been doing, I think, many groups now, recovering the work of many women architects that were completely forgotten or erased from history. I think that is something that you see. It's like, wow, there are many men, many that were before us that somehow open the way. So celebrate that, but also celebrate, us now in the present.
Yeah, no, I do believe that many women work have been forgotten in the way, especially because, like, for example, Zaha Hadid was the first woman to win the Pritzker Prize. And
Yes.
considering, like, that was like kind of recent compared to how long the prize already exists. So
Yeah.
how many women before Zaha were now recognized, for example, And and is there something you believe women bring to architecture that is still undervalued or not fully recognized?
Mm, I think in general, when we are working in projects, for example, here, which is quite horizontal, the way that we design and we brainstorm ideas, there is no difference, no? There is no difference from who the ideas come, and rather male or female. I think that the difference comes when you are representing, talking with a client. And sometimes it's not only the architecture companies, but it's also the whole discipline in terms of, when you face clients or face manufacturers or contractors, there is a whole culture around that sees women in a different way. So what we said all the time is that, here internally, we know who we are, we know our value, but sometimes it's more difficult when you go out and you have to, prove the others that, I am the one leading this project, or I am the one that is taking the decisions, and I'm able to do it. And that's why, again, the work of um, portraying women, featuring women in every kind of public, let's say, opportunity. As you say, this, for example, in this case, women that shape the world, women that shape spaces, women that are behind projects is very important. I think it's a really nice initiative that helps and contributes to what we are talking.
Yes. Well, I know that you have a short time, so
Yeah.
we're not going to be able to ask so many questions more. But thank you, Maria, so much for
Thanks to
your
you.
time for the presentation. Let's see if we can meet each other next Friday again.
Yes, there will be other times. Thanks to everyone for joining and for listening this story. Thanks.
Thank you. And well, I also would love to thank all the audience for being here with us today. I know we have many women watching this webinar series today. It's very special. And well, we have many women in our Architecture Hunter team. So that's something really like the theme for today's webinar series was very important for all of us. And I really would like to give a shout out to all the women in Architecture Hunter team, especially Rafaela, who was also here today hosting together with me. And well, that's it. Thank you again, Linda and Maria Loreto, for the presentation. We do believe this is a very important topic that we still have to navigate. And just a quick reminder before we wrap up everything up. We have officially opened the Architecture Hunter Awards. We are in the third edition, and we're really looking forward to see your projects there. If you feel that you have a project that is really worth it, please go and access our website and get to know a little bit more about the Architecture Hunter Awards. And see you the next session. Thank you.